June 5, 1944, the coast of Normandy was quiet, almost eerily so. The sea whispered against the sand, and the gray clouds above drifted lazily, hiding the violence that would soon come. In small bunkers scattered along the cliffs, German soldiers of the 352nd Infantry Division sat in silence. Some smoked their last cigarettes before lights out. Others cleaned their rifles for the 100th time, more from habit than necessity. Corporal Hans Weber leaned against a cold concrete wall, staring into the darkness through a narrow firing slit. "Too quiet," he muttered, his voice echoing slightly in the empty casemate. Beside him, his friend, Private Ernst Vogel, chuckled. "You say that every night, Hans. Maybe the Tommies finally gave up." But even Vogel didn't sound convinced. They had been hearing rumors for weeks about an invasion, about an Allied armada waiting across the Channel. Yet the days kept passing, and nothing happened. Along the beach, sentries walked their patrol routes, boots crunching softly on gravel. The salty air mixed with the faint scent of diesel and oil from the gun emplacements. Occasionally, a flare illuminated the horizon, revealing only the calm, endless sea. Somewhere inland, frogs croaked, and the wind rustled the grass around the barbed wire. It was a strangely peaceful night for men preparing for war. In a nearby farmhouse converted into a command post, Lieutenant Carl Fischer reviewed his reports by lantern light. Radio intercepts were confused. One signal warned of an invasion, another dismissed it as a diversion. High command in Paris believed the real attack would come further north, near Calais. Fischer felt uneasy. He looked at the map pinned to the wall and whispered, "If they come here, we are not ready." Meanwhile, far out at sea, beyond the Germans' vision, the largest invasion fleet in human history was already moving silently through the darkness. Over 5,000 ships, carrying more than 150,000 soldiers, were crossing the Channel. But in Normandy all was still. Shortly before midnight, the wind changed direction. A faint hum, distant yet growing, began to reach the bunkers. Weber frowned, leaning forward. "Do you hear that?" Vogel stopped moving. They both listened, the low, rhythmic sound of engines, far too many to count. For a moment they said nothing. The night no longer felt calm. Weber reached for his helmet and said quietly, "Maybe you were wrong, Ernst." Outside, the horizon began to flash. Not from lightning, but from the first explosions of naval gunfire, miles away. The ground trembled faintly beneath their boots. The long-awaited invasion had begun. The calm was over. 4 weeks before June 6, 1944, the German High Command watched the English Channel with growing unease. Reports flowed in daily, ship movements, troop buildups, the hum of aircraft engines across the water. But the question remained, where would the Allies strike? In northern France, the German 15th Army waited at Pas-de-Calais, convinced it was the logical invasion point. The Allies had gone to great lengths to make them believe that fake radio traffic, inflatable tanks, and a phantom army under General Patton's name. Operation Fortitude was working perfectly. The real defenders of Normandy, like the 352nd Infantry Division, received little attention and even fewer reinforcements. Sergeant Otto Reinhardt, stationed near Point du Hoc, stared through his binoculars at the gray horizon. "Nothing," he said, lowering them. "Just fog." His commander, Hauptmann Lehmann, nodded. "They'll come at Calais. That's what Berlin says." Otto didn't argue, but doubt crept into his mind. He had seen too much movement across the Channel lately. Lights flickering at night, planes flying in patterns too deliberate to be random. Meanwhile, in the German intelligence center in Paris, analysts pieced together intercepted Allied messages. The codebreakers at Bletchley Park had already fed them false information. To the Germans, it seemed that Patton's 1st U.S. Army Group was preparing for a massive assault toward Calais. General Jodl himself told Hitler that any attack on Normandy would likely be a diversion. On the British side, the Channel was alive with shadows. Under the cover of night, Landing craft and destroyers began to move into position. Radar-reflecting balloons and deceptive radio beacons created the illusion of a fleet further north. From the beaches of Dover, one could already hear the distant rumble of engines, a mechanical heartbeat of an approaching storm. Back in Normandy, Private Ernst Vogel wrote a letter home by candlelight. "The channel looks peaceful," he wrote. "Sometimes I wonder if we'll ever actually see this invasion they keep warning us about." He folded the paper neatly, unaware that he would never finish another letter. At around 10 p.m., Luftwaffe radar operators near Cherbourg detected strange reflections. Ghost echoes? Hundreds of them, drifting southward. "Probably weather balloons," one officer said, but an older sergeant shook his head. "No, those are ships." His voice was barely audible, drowned out by the static of the radio. The German coast was now staring into a sea full of phantoms, some real, some not. In the darkness beyond the horizon, the Allies were coming, their ships casting shadows over the channel. The deception had worked. The Germans were looking in the wrong direction, waiting for an attack that would never come. By early June 1944, the German forces along the French coast had settled into a rhythm that felt almost safe. The war was raging elsewhere, in Italy, in the east, in the air over Germany, but Normandy remained quiet. To many soldiers stationed there, it seemed like the one corner of Europe untouched by chaos. At the bunker near Vierville-sur-Mer, Corporal Hans Weber stretched his legs and yawned. "It's been months of drills and boredom," he said, glancing at the horizon. "If the invasion ever comes, I'll believe it when I see it." His comrade, Private Vogel, laughed. "You worry too much, Hans. The British are busy bombing Berlin. They won't risk crossing the channel." Even the officers shared this illusion. General Dahlmann, commanding the German 7th Army, reassured his men that any invasion would strike at Calais, the shortest crossing point. "Normandy," he had said during a briefing, "too far, too risky, too heavily defended by nature." His words echoed through the ranks, building a false confidence that settled over the entire front. Across the fields, French villagers carried on with their lives, quietly watched by the occupiers. The roads were calm, the weather unpredictable. Storms had battered the coast for days, grounding Luftwaffe patrols. "No one attacks in weather like this," muttered Lieutenant Fischer as he inspected his men. "If anything, we should be worrying about falling asleep, not being invaded." Meanwhile, in Berlin, Hitler himself was asleep. His staff had learned not to wake him unless absolutely necessary. Rommel was away visiting his wife in Germany for her birthday. The very leaders responsible for defending France were either absent or unconcerned. But under that illusion of peace, the signs were there. Allied aircraft had been flying strange routes over northern France, dropping metal strips, window, to confuse German radar. Reports from the French resistance warned of unusual activity across the channel, yet most were dismissed as rumors. In the early hours of June 6th, a storm rolled in. Lightning flashed across the coast, illuminating the concrete bunkers and barbed wire for brief seconds. The soldiers stayed in their shelters, playing cards, smoking, talking about home. "If this is war," Vogel joked, "then I hope it never ends." He couldn't have known that beyond the storm clouds, thousands of ships were already moving toward them. The wind carried a distant, unfamiliar hum, engines, hundreds of them. But to tired German ears, it blended with the thunder. Their false sense of security would last only a few more hours. After that, the world would explode. It was just after midnight on June 6, 1944, when the first strange reports began to reach the German command posts along the French coast. In the quiet darkness near Caen, a telephone rang sharply in a bunker. Sergeant Ernst Meyer picked it up, still half asleep. The voice on the other end was frantic. A radar station at Wistrium was detecting hundreds of unidentified blips over the channel. Meyer frowned. "Hundreds? That can't be right." The radar officer swore it was no malfunction. Something big is coming, he insisted. But the storm outside had been fierce for days. Most officers believed it was just interference from the weather. At 12:30 a.m., flares began to appear in the sky to the west. The men in coastal bunkers looked out, puzzled. Then came the first parachutes, white ghosts descending silently over the fields. At first, the Germans thought they were dummies, a trick. But minutes later, gunfire echoed from the direction of Saint-Mire-Église. The invasion had begun, though no one yet understood its scale. In Corentin, Major Hoffman was jolted awake by the sound of distant explosions. He rushed outside as the night sky flickered with light. "It must be another air raid," he told his adjutant, though unease crept into his voice. Moments later, a motorcycle messenger arrived, soaked and breathless. "Paratroopers, British and American, have landed behind our lines." The German phone network crackled with confusion. Reports poured in from every sector. Enemy gliders in the fields, bridges under attack, strange ships seen offshore. But higher command hesitated. General von Rundstedt believed it was just a diversion, a small raid to draw forces away from Calais. "The main attack will come later," he said. "Do not overreact." In the bunkers at Omaha and Utah sectors, soldiers could hear the dull thump of naval guns far out at sea. The vibration ran through the ground, subtle but constant. Some men stepped outside to listen. "That's not thunder," whispered Weber, his face pale. By 3 a.m., the phone lines were jammed. Officers shouted over the static, trying to confirm what was real and what was illusion. No one had clear orders. Rommel was still in Germany, unreachable. Hitler was asleep, and no one dared wake him. At 4:15 a.m., the horizon began to glow faintly. Through the mist, shapes appeared, massive, dark, and moving. One soldier grabbed his binoculars and froze. "Mein Gott," he whispered. Ships. So many ships. Sirens finally wailed along the coast, echoing through every bunker and trench. Men scrambled for their positions, loading rifles and machine guns, hearts pounding. The long-awaited invasion, the one they had dismissed for months, was here. For the German soldiers of Normandy, the first alarms had sounded, and nothing would ever be the same again. At dawn on June 6, 1944, the sea itself seemed to be on fire. As the first light touched the gray waves of the English Channel, German soldiers along the Normandy coast stared in disbelief. Out on the horizon, stretching as far as the eye could see, came a floating city, thousands of ships, landing craft and destroyers, all advancing toward them. Corporal Franz Neumann gripped his binoculars from his bunker on Point du Hoc. "It's the entire British Navy," he muttered, his voice trembling. His commander, Lieutenant Kruger, said nothing. He knew this was no raid. This was the invasion they had feared for years. At 5:45 a.m., the first naval shells screamed overhead. The air tore apart with a sound unlike anything the men had heard before. Seconds later, the coastline erupted. Concrete bunkers shook, sandbags burst, and the air filled with dust and the acrid smell of explosives. From the deck of the USS Texas Dash, American gunners worked in rhythm, firing round after round toward the German defenses. Every explosion marked another piece of the Atlantic wall torn apart. The sea boiled from the blasts, waves tinted orange by fire and smoke. Inside his bunker near Omaha Beach, Sergeant Dieter Klein tried to shout orders, but the roar drowned his voice. The steel doors bent inward under pressure, and shards of concrete rained from the ceiling. "Hold your fire until you see them," he yelled, though many couldn't even hear him anymore. To the men on the beaches, it felt as if the earth itself was shaking. Craters opened where trenches once were. Machine gun nests disappeared in plumes of flame. Yet, despite the bombardment, many German positions still held. Their reinforced bunkers, buried deep in the cliffs, survived the inferno. Out at sea, the Allied Armada continued its relentless assault. British cruisers targeted the eastern sectors, while American battleships focused on Omaha and Utah. Each ship fired with precision, guided by spotter planes above the clouds. The Germans shot blindly into the smoke, hoping to hit something, anything. At 6:20 a.m., the bombardment intensified again. Whole sections of coastline vanished under curtains of flame and smoke. Klein's radio crackled. "They're landing craft approaching." He peered through the observation slit and saw the outlines of boats breaking through the surf. For a moment, everything went eerily quiet. The big guns ceased fire, replaced by the steady rumble of engines. The sea was littered with burning wreckage, and the horizon glowed red. Then came the next wave, the soldiers. From his position, Newman could see them climbing down from the boats, some falling, others running through the chaos. "They're coming," he said softly. Behind him, a young conscript crossed himself. The Germans braced for what was to come. The bombardment had ended, but for them, the real battle was only beginning. When the first landing craft hit the beaches, the world dissolved into chaos. Smoke covered everything, thick, black, choking. The air smelled of salt, burning oil, and blood. German defenders fired blindly into the haze, unsure whether they were hitting soldiers, wreckage, or the sea itself. Sergeant Dieter Klein could barely see beyond a few meters from his position. The communication lines were dead, the field telephone silent. He tried shouting into the next bunker, but his voice was swallowed by explosions. Every few seconds, the ground shook as shells slammed into the cliffs above. Out in the surf, the Allied troops struggled to reach the sand. Many never made it. Boats exploded before the ramps even dropped. Those who did land were met by a storm of bullets. Men crawled over bodies, dragging equipment, trying to find cover behind anything that wasn't already burning. Private James Rowe of the U.S. 1st Infantry Division clutched his rifle, his heart pounding like a drum. "Move! Move!" his sergeant yelled, but there was nowhere to move, only a narrow strip of wet sand under constant fire. He dove behind a steel obstacle just as a mortar round hit nearby, showering him with seawater and fragments of metal. The beach became a nightmare of noise and confusion. Radios crackled uselessly, medics shouted for help, and officers tried to organize their men, but orders vanished in the roar of gunfire. The landing plan, so carefully drawn up in England, was collapsing under the weight of reality. From his damaged bunker, Klein peered through the smoke and saw movement, hundreds of dark figures advancing through the mist. For a moment he hesitated. Were they retreating? Were they reinforcements? Then, the unmistakable silhouettes of American helmets emerged. He gave the order to fire. Machine guns screamed to life, tracers slicing through the air. Soldiers dropped instantly, the survivors throwing themselves flat. But still they pushed forward. "Keep moving!" someone shouted again, and James Rowe forced himself up, sprinting through the bullets, slipping on blood-soaked sand. Behind him, a tank tried to roll ashore but hit a mine. The explosion sent debris raining down, the shockwave knocking men off their feet. The blast tore open a crater that quickly filled with seawater. For the Germans, confusion reigned as well. Some believed they were under naval attack again. Others thought paratroopers had landed behind them. The radios buzzed with static. Higher command was silent. Orders from the 352nd Infantry Division never arrived. Each soldier fought alone, reacting instinctively. By mid-morning, the battlefield was unrecognizable. Smoke hid the sea, flames consumed what was left of the defenses, and the screams of the wounded echoed through the chaos. Both sides were trapped in the same inferno, barely understanding what was happening. It was no longer about strategy or orders, it was survival. Every decision came down to instinct, every breath a miracle. On that narrow strip of sand called Omaha, war had lost its shape and reason. Only chaos remained. By late morning, the beaches of Normandy had turned into a vision of hell. The roar of Allied naval guns had shaken the cliffs for hours, yet somehow, many of the German positions still held. Deep within their bunkers of concrete and steel, the defenders clung to their weapons, their discipline, and their duty. Sergeant Wilhelm Hartmann wiped the dust from his eyes and loaded another belt into the MG-42. The barrel glowed red from constant fire, but he refused to stop. "They keep coming," his gunner shouted over the thunder outside. Hartmann nodded, teeth clenched. "Then we keep shooting." He had been fighting since dawn. The first wave of Americans had fallen like wheat before a scythe, but new soldiers kept appearing, pushing forward with terrifying resolve. The machine guns rattled endlessly, the air thick with cordite. Through narrow firing slits, Hartmann saw them. Shadows moving through smoke and flame, carrying rifles, dragging wounded comrades, never stopping. In the neighboring bunker, Corporal Franz Muller manned an anti-tank gun. His crew had been reduced from 6 men to 2, yet he continued firing. Each shot kicked up dust and debris, echoing like thunder in the confined space. "They said we could stop an invasion," he muttered to himself. "But this is the end of the world." Above them, the Allied airstrikes returned. The sky rumbled as bombs tore through positions, collapsing trenches and turning sand into glass. Still, those who could stand fought. Even when ammunition ran low, even when their weapons overheated, they did not surrender. For these men, retreat was unthinkable. Many had grown up under Nazi propaganda, drilled with the belief that Germany's fate depended on their courage. Others fought simply because the man beside them was still alive, and quitting meant abandoning him. Hartmann's gun finally jammed. He cursed, fumbling with the bolt, but it was too late. The next shell from a Sherman tank struck nearby. The explosion hurled him to the floor. His ears rang, his face was bleeding, but when he opened his eyes and saw the flag of his regiment on the wall, he forced himself up again. Outside, the tide of invasion was unstoppable. American troops had breached several strong points, flamethrowers sweeping through trenches. The smell of burning fuel filled the air. And yet, in pockets along the cliffs, German defenders fought to the last bullet. By noon, most of the coastal batteries were silenced, their crews dead or captured. But the legend of their resistance would spread even among their enemies. Later, American soldiers would speak with grudging respect. Those guys never gave up. In the chaos of D-Day, amid the fire and smoke, the German defenders' iron will delayed the Allied advance just long enough for history to remember their defiance. They were beaten, yes, but not broken. Their courage, born of duty and desperation, became the last echo of a fading empire. The first wave had already hit the beaches, and now, as dawn's pale light broke through the smoke, Normandy erupted into madness. For the German soldiers stationed along the Atlantic Wall, it felt as if the world had ended overnight. Radio chatter screamed with conflicting orders, artillery fire drowned out voices, and the coastline shook under the endless rain of shells. Corporal Hans Becker sprinted from his bunker, his helmet half hanging off, the sound of explosions chasing him. "Where are they coming from?" he yelled to his commanding officer, Lieutenant Weber. Weber's face was pale, his binoculars trembling in his hands. "Everywhere," he whispered. "They're everywhere." The German defensive lines, once thought impenetrable, were collapsing under the weight of chaos. Communication wires had been cut. Many outposts had lost contact entirely, and some officers didn't even know who they were fighting. Reports came in of paratroopers landing miles inland, some disguised, others real. "Are they British? Americans? Both?" one soldier shouted, gripping his rifle as flares illuminated the sky. From the cliffs, Becker could see the sea. It looked alive. Hundreds of ships filled the horizon, spitting fire and smoke. Landing craft swarmed the beaches like insects, and behind them, enormous battleships thundered relentlessly. The air reeked of cordite, seawater, and blood. Inside the command bunker, panic grew. The phone lines crackled with overlapping voices, orders to retreat, to hold, to regroup all at once. One message shouted above the rest: "Reinforcements are not coming. You are on your own." Weber slammed his fist against the steel wall. "They told us it was impossible," he growled. The Führer said they wouldn't land here, but reality was now undeniable. The Allies had arrived, and they brought hell with them. Outside, the situation was worsening by the minute. Mortars exploded across the trenches, sending dirt and shrapnel flying. Medics dragged the wounded toward the rear, though there was hardly any rear left. Screams and gunfire merged into one horrific symphony. Becker stumbled through the smoke, clutching his rifle, disoriented. The familiar landscape had vanished. Bunkers destroyed, mines detonated, comrades missing. He saw one soldier running the wrong way, another firing blindly into the fog. No one knew what was happening anymore. At one point, an officer tried to rally them. "Hold your ground. The enemy is not invincible," he shouted. But even as he spoke, a shell landed nearby, and he disappeared in a flash of light. As the morning dragged on, the German defenses fractured. Units that had trained together for years were now scattered, fighting in isolated pockets. Some bunkers went silent, others kept firing until their last bullet. In that chaos, discipline began to fade, replaced by pure survival instinct. The soldiers were no longer defending Hitler's Reich. They were just trying to stay alive another minute. By midday, the once proud Atlantic Wall was a ruin of smoke and twisted metal. The defenders fought on, confused and cut off, unaware that the greatest invasion in history had already swept past them. Even as the beaches of Normandy burned under relentless bombardment, many German defenders refused to yield. Deep within reinforced bunkers and concrete casemates, men clung to their weapons with a grim determination, their discipline and training tested like never before. Sergeant Wilhelm Hartmann adjusted the belt of his MG-42, the machine gun rattling continuously as the waves of Allied soldiers approached. Around him, the air was thick with smoke, dust, and the acrid smell of cordite. "We hold this ground," he muttered to his gunner, though the chaos outside made the words feel fragile. The first waves of attackers were cut down by his fire, yet more kept coming, forcing him to reload, aim, and fire without pause. In another bunker, Corporal Franz Müller manned an anti-tank gun with only 2 remaining crew members. Their comrades had been killed or wounded in the earlier shelling. The roar of approaching Sherman tanks filled the air, yet Müller's hands remained steady. Each round fired was a desperate attempt to slow the invasion, a small defiance against the overwhelming force advancing toward them. The defenders' resolve stemmed from more than orders. It was duty, fear, and loyalty to comrades beside them. Retreat was unthinkable. Many were young men, raised on the doctrine of honor and loyalty to the Reich, while others simply fought for survival, unwilling to abandon the men next to them in the trenches. Naval bombardment and aerial attacks continued, turning sand into glass and reducing fortifications to rubble. Yet pockets of German resistance persisted, delaying the Allied advance long enough to allow some regrouping inland. Hartmann's bunker shook as a nearby shell exploded, dust and debris filling the cramped space. Wiping blood from his eyes, he loaded another belt of ammunition and fired, refusing to surrender to the chaos around him. By midday, many coastal positions were destroyed, but the courage of the defenders left an impression even on the attackers. Stories would later emerge of German soldiers fighting until their last bullet, their stubborn defense earning reluctant respect from the Allies. In the midst of fire, smoke, and carnage, the German defenders' iron will shone, a testament to human determination even in the face of inevitable defeat. Their courage delayed the Allied forces, bought precious hours, and left a mark on history, proving that discipline and resolve could endure even when the world itself seemed to collapse around them. On the morning of June 6, 1944, Field Marshal Erwin Rommel awoke to unsettling news. Reports from his commanders along the Normandy coast painted a picture far worse than he had anticipated. The invasion had begun, and the Allies were making landfall in multiple sectors simultaneously. The Atlantic Wall, which Rommel had believed could hold back any attack long enough for reinforcements to arrive, was under intense pressure. Rommel, who had spent months inspecting defenses, moving troops, and reinforcing bunkers, felt a chilling certainty settle over him. "They have chosen the right place and the right time," he muttered to his aide, staring at a map littered with red pins representing the landing zones. For weeks he had predicted an attack at Calais. His preparations there were thorough, but Normandy had been comparatively under-defended. The deception by the Allies, fake radio traffic, dummy tanks, and misleading troop movements had worked brilliantly. By late morning, radio updates confirmed his fears. German units were fragmented, command lines disrupted, and entire strongpoints were falling. "It's worse than I imagined," Rommel said quietly, pacing the floor of his command post. He knew that the soldiers on the beaches were facing overwhelming firepower, naval bombardments, airstrikes, and sheer numbers of invading troops. He realized that even his best-laid plans could not change the reality on the ground. Reinforcements from Paris and beyond would take hours, maybe days, to reach the embattled coast. By then, the Allies would have secured a foothold, and the battle would be underway inland. For Rommel, the invasion was no longer a distant threat. It was happening, and he had been outmaneuvered. Despite the dire situation, Rommel remained composed, issuing orders to coordinate what reinforcements he could. He instructed his commanders to organize defensive positions, delay the Allies' advance, and hold key points as long as possible. Every moment mattered. He knew that failure to act decisively could lead to catastrophic losses, not just of territory, but of morale and lives. Looking out the window at the gray, stormy channel, Rommel understood the gravity of the situation. Years of preparation, years of foresight, were colliding with the stark reality of Allied planning and execution. The invasion had begun, and the outcome of the day would shape the course of the war. Rommel's realization was clear and painful. The Allies had struck decisively, and the defenders of Normandy were about to face the fiercest battle of the Second World War.